Jake, thanks again for joining us for another edition of your Super Safe Money Updates.
My pleasure.
I know you are adding a new category of topics called Things That Drive Me Crazy. Why did you decide to do this?
Well, there's a lot of stuff out there in the financial industry that literally does drive me crazy. There's outright lies that are being told. There's statistics that are being manipulated. There's half-truths and mistruths. And it's costing the investor a lot of money, especially the retired investor who doesn't have a long time to recoup losses.
Okay, so what's the first thing that you want to talk about that's driving you crazy now?
Well, it's something that they call the 4% rule, and it's been around for decades in financial planning.
Okay, well, can you tell our listeners what the 4% rule exactly is?
Sure, the 4% rule is something that they say for a stock and bond portfolio. They've always said that as long as you only draw out 4% of your portfolio each year, that your money will always last.
Okay, so what is it exactly that drives you crazy about the 4% rule?
Well, the first thing is they call it a rule, and that would allude to the fact that maybe it happens all the time. Unfortunately, the 4% rule is a probability. So the first thing is that they make you think that it's a certainty, but it's not. What they're saying is the studies show that there's an 85% chance that your portfolio will last if you take 4% out. So if we hit a crazy market downturn like 2008, all of a sudden the odds of your portfolio surviving are much, much less, depending on age and some other factors. So the big thing is that they call it a rule, and so people think, well, I can rely on that as long as I live. So that lulls people into complacency and gets people to do things that cost them a lot of money. The second thing is they don't tell you the full truth behind it, meaning all of the different factors that they're looking at to show whether that portfolio will survive. And as I mentioned a moment ago, a 2008 market crash, and we've had two 50% downturns in the market in the last 13 years. But those downturns can throw that 4% rule out the window, yet people still rely on it. Also, the safe part of the portfolio that they use is bonds, and that's great unless you use Detroit municipal bonds or Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, or any of the other dozens of municipalities and companies that have defaulted on their bonds. So the problem is that it's not a certainty. The other thing is they're using what they call a Monte Carlo simulation, which is a computer program that looks at thousands and thousands of different scenarios. Well, at the end of the day, they go, well, okay, there's an 85% chance your money will last. Well, that's all a computer simulation based on past performance. So if we end up with different variables in the future, all of a sudden that's thrown out the window. And the last thing, and probably one of the biggest things that drives me crazy, is the fact that there's other ways to get safe income from your portfolio without taking outright risk of loss with a stock and bond portfolio. So people are talked into putting 100% of their money in stocks and bonds, and they think, yeah, I can draw 4% out whenever I want. And Ball State recently did a study, two of their PhDs in the finance and business department, and they re-looked at the 4% rule, and they said there's actually almost an 80% chance of a portfolio surviving taking 4% out in today's market conditions. So if you look at that, there's a 20% chance or a 1 in 5% chance that your money won't last. That's pretty high odds to be gambling that you're going to have income in the future. So you don't want that big of a failure rate possibility. And that's why the 4% rule drives me crazy, is it gets people to do things they think are going to work, but it's only a probability. So if you're in the 1 in 5 category, all of a sudden you run out of money. And if your average life expectancy is 82, and that's what they built the study on, and you live to 87, you're in big trouble.
So what if our listeners want to learn a little more about this 4% rule?
Well, it's a lot of data to cover in just a couple of minutes, but we do have some information on our YouTube channel. If you look just below the video, there'll be a link there where you can link into our e-zine. It's an email newsletter that we put out, and we'll expound on some of the points that we talked about today.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jake.
You bet. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to our followers, too.